Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I want to chat about Call of Duty's new DMZ mode. If you're a regular viewer here on the channel, then this is absolutely going to be in relation to the highly anticipated division Heartland, or if you're a Call of Duty fan or just fellow, internet explorer, I want to use this video to give some of my breakdown and thoughts on the DMZ mode in comparison to other rival titles coming up, so this should be fun. Let's get right into it. So, if you hadn't heard, DMZ is a brand new mode and whole type of new experience for the Call of Duty franchise that Modern Warfare 2 released last week. You're watching footage of it in the background, and it's the latest entry in the increasingly popular extraction shooter, more broadly survival shooter genre. For a lot of people, I think Escape from Tarkov is considered the king of this genre. In my opinion, Tarkov kind of stands on its own. It's absolutely the same kind of game, but it is so much more advanced, complex, and intricate than pretty much any other game in the genre. And while yes, absolutely, games like Hunt Showdown and now DMZ have taken inspiration from Escape from Tarkov, that kind of wave and rising trend of games like these tend to lean a bit more into the action side of things, the multiplayer experience, while still absolutely having those survival and extraction themes. So, Call of Duty is now forayed into the survival action shooter genre. What do I think of it? It's not bad. It's not half bad. A lot of the skepticisms I had about the game beforehand were confirmed, unfortunately. Some I was pleasantly surprised by, but overall, I enjoyed myself with DMZ. The overall premise, as is the case with many of the games in the genre, is that you put together a loadout that can be lost if you die in the mode, and then you enter the map with both AI enemies and other real players, and complete objectives, loot, whatever the game has set up before calling an extraction to escape with whatever you've collected. And again, if you die, you lose everything. So at its core, I think DMZ delivers perfectly well on that core concept. The one area I had been quite skeptical about, and these skepticisms were unfortunately mostly confirmed for me, was how they were going to handle the persistent progression and loot. Because in games such as Tarkov and Hunt, like I mentioned earlier, the entire game is that core mode, right? Any loot you collect is the only stuff you can use if you want to play the game more, creating more purpose behind protecting it. With DMZ, the persistence itself is done perfectly fine, but I can also just back out and go into multiplayer or Warzone and use my earned unlocks as much as I want. So at least in its current iteration, I don't think DMZ offers enough of an incentive to continually play it to warrant the risk-reward aspect of the loot. And again, that's something I was concerned about before going in, because Call of Duty has never been about that. And while I think they've created a solid foundation here, I think they've got a ways to go if they want DMZ to stand on its own and incentivize people to interact with that persistent loot when they could just go and play, Warzone at any time. The one area here I am really impressed by and I do like is the concept they've introduced of DMZ having exclusive loot, where if you've played it by now, I'm sure you're likely aware, the M13 assault rifle was added with the launch of Season 1 for the game, and aside from buying it in a yet-to-be-released store bundle, the only way to acquire it is by going into DMZ and killing this one open-world boss, and then once you successfully extract with it, that's when you can use it anywhere else in the game. That's a solid idea. That's a reason to go and play DMZ, but I just think they're going to have to work on expanding that concept greatly if they want DMZ to stand on its own. The only real other disappointment or downside of the mode to me is the AI. Compared to some of these other games in the genre that we're going to talk about in a minute when covering some of DMZ's upcoming competition, the AI in this mode are just not that compelling to fight against, in my opinion. They don't present any dynamic tactics. They don't seem to really work together that much. They'll funnel out onto the street, crouch down, and take cover or shoot whatever, and that's about it. The lethality of the AI is clearly where the emphasis is placed with their crazy damage output, which is certainly one way of introducing difficulty in an experience like this, but I tend to appreciate a nice balance between enemy damage output and enemy tactics and intelligence. And DMZ definitely swings way more towards the former. But as far as the positives go, like I said, there's absolutely a solid foundation here. Call of Duty doesn't skimp on quality gameplay, gunplay, and movement, and that obviously does nothing but elevate the experience here. The new map shared for DMZ and Warzone, Al Mazrah, is really great and provides dynamic and fun spaces to fight in while being large enough to space everything out. There's a great variety of missions, objectives, different events, etc., and secrets. I think the fact that they are the secret blueprints to unlock, keys to earn and use, it just makes the map and whole experience feel much more alive, and that's awesome. At the end of the day, DMZ, in my opinion, is undoubtedly a positive experience. There's fun to be had there. But evident by the fact that Infinity Ward themselves have branded the mode as a beta, I think there's a lot of work to be done in order to make it feel as compelling, as worthwhile of an experience of a mode as multiplayer or Warzone. Which again, to me, is no surprise, because this is COD's first attempt at this kind of a mode, this kind of an experience, whereas they've been doing multiplayer for 15 plus years and are on their third big iteration of a battle royale. So yeah, I have no doubt that over the next 6 months to a year, DMZ will continue to improve and get even better. The question is, will the interest still be there when it eventually does? Because there is some big competition on the way, competition that has far more experience in this wheelhouse, and competition where their sole focus is this survival-based mode, unlike Modern Warfare 2, which has 2 other major experiences to split the devs' time with. There's two games that I want to highlight and talk about here. One of them, as I mentioned earlier, you will be very familiar with if you're a Division fan and regularly watch my channel. The other, not so much, but it's one I've actually wanted to dedicate time to in a video for quite a while. So let's start with that one. I'm talking about the upcoming Last of Us spin-off game. I'll put the concept art for it up on screen. This is a spiritual successor to the factions mode that they had in Last of Us Part 1, which housed PvP, multiplayer action. Now this was supposed to launch alongside Last of Us Part 2, but it got delayed and made into its entire own new spin-off game, which definitely excites me as far as the potential. Now, there's not many details about this game other than the location of San Francisco. You can see in the background of the image, there's new characters, there's some sort of storm behind them, so there's been a lot of speculation that this game would just be a cut and dry battle royale title. I'm not so convinced, for a few reasons. One, if it's going to have been delayed for like 3 years now, if it launches in 2023, I highly doubt all of that time was just spent perfecting a BR mode. Not impossible, but I question that a lot. Two, the heads at Naughty Dog, the development studio, have said this game will have its own in-depth story just like the other Last of Us games, and that will be presented in its own unique ways. What that screams to me is that this title will follow a similar path to a lot of other titles in the survival action shooter genre. DMZ doesn't quite have, huge story integration yet, but I know Tarkov has some world building done. Vigor is one that I played that really integrates some of the story into the world. Hunt Showdown, there's a lot of these games that don't have outright campaigns, but they use different methods and bake their story into the worlds that the game takes place in. And I foresee something very similar happening here with the Last of Us spinoff. Plus, unlike how I said DMZ had to completely transition away from every core experience COD has ever done, Last of Us has always been about slower, more methodical, realistic, and survival-based gameplay. It's going to much more easily be able to transition over to focusing on those elements more broadly. Now, absolutely, that doesn't guarantee it'll be, quote-unquote better than DMZ. My whole point here is that I just think it's likely this game will launch with a much more fleshed-out survival shooter game setup than DMZ currently has. And now DMZ has to try and catch up to where I think that game is going to be at when it launches. And I've said this on stream a few times before, I've never played Last of Us, I've never even owned a PlayStation, but once we get more details about this game, if it looks as good as I think it's going to be, I will be very tempted to get a PS5 just to play, which sounds crazy even to me, but we'll see. I'm pretty psyched for it. But before we close out, we then have to talk about the one, the only Division, Heartland. If anyone is unaware, actually quite similar to this Last of Us spinoff, Heartland was rumored to begin production as a side mode or experience to the Division 2 before it was ultimately split off and made into its entire own game. And from the reveal trailer and information we got a few months ago from the devs themselves, Heartland is yet to be another survival action shooter making its way onto the scene. Now again, quite similarly to Last of Us, Heartland is going to have a pretty smooth and seamless transition into focusing on its survival elements compared to the looter shooter genre of the Division 1 and 2. And that's because Division has had survival at its core since day one. Even though they scaled it back a bit on its launch, Division 1's original trailer at E3 2013 displayed survival mechanics from the jump, scavenging for water, food, materials, etc. And then of course the game did introduce the survival DLC game mode, which for many, you can go research this if you haven't heard about it, it is considered by many to be the birth of the battle royale trend. Survival had elements of PvP, PvE, and saw players slowly converge in the center of the map to be pushed into fighting to survive. And while they never capitalized much on this mode back in the day, we're now getting the spiritual successor in Heartland. So of course, if you've watched this channel, you'll know I'm immensely excited for Heartland, but even taking that excitement away, I think many of you can probably see my point here in relation to DMZ. I think DMZ is a solid mode, it's fun, but since it's not Infinity Ward's sole focus, since it's, in my opinion, leaving some to be desired in terms of incentive and content, I think it leaves the door open for these games like the Last of Us spinoff, like Heartland, to come in and really make a name for themselves. Especially since Tarkov isn't on consoles and it's so advanced like I mentioned, I feel like there isn't a definitive king of the new survival extraction shooter genre for a large majority of gamers. The Fortnite of the bunch, right? Not saying in terms of any similarities to Fortnite, but in terms of just how popular and well known it is. We had Battlefield 2042's Hazard Zone, we all know how that went. DMZ has launched in a much better state than that, and I'm sure it already has some avid fans, but I just think there's a lot of work to be done to make it incredibly desirable to play. Some smaller games like Vigor, like Hunt Showdown, are fine games in my opinion. Hunt is especially fun if you haven't played it, and while they do have their fan bases, they've been out for quite a while and they haven't really broken that boundary of popularity. So that's all to say that I think 2023 is going to be a really big year for this genre. It's going to be the year where we might finally see who claims the throne of the survival shooter trend. Could it be DMZ if Infinity Ward kicks it into high gear and puts in the extra work into it? Maybe. Could it be this Last of Us spinoff? Maybe. Could it be the Division Heartland? Maybe. But it really does feel like we're in a bit of a race right now. As for who can launch with the most content, the most solid foundation, and not need months upon months of work to get it up to snuff. Hazard Zone needed that, and DICE has all but abandoned it. So I really do think whether it's one of these games we've talked about in this video or one that's not yet announced or one that I'm just unaware of, somebody is going to come out on top and have that mass appeal, and I'm just super curious to find out who it's going to be. And I really do think we're going to see that play out in 2023. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you can be updated every time I upload. Let me know your thoughts about this whole discussion with DMZ and the larger survival shooter genre. If you've played DMZ, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it needs more work to make it that pinnacle survival shooter mode? Perhaps you think it's already there, and what do you think about some of these other games we talked about? Last of Us, Heartland, maybe there's others I'm forgetting. Who do you think will win this race to the top, if there even is one to be had? Whatever your thoughts are on those or any other topics we discussed, I will as always be super curious to read through them. Really enjoyed making this video, so I hope you all had fun watching it, learned a thing or two. Again, the regular viewers around here know that I'm very stoked for Heartland as I'm a big Division fan, but it is refreshing to look out beyond that every now and then and see what else gaming has to offer. I'm still the most excited for Heartland, I won't lie. But like I said, that Last of Us game really intrigues me, and it will be cool to see what Infinity Ward does with DMZ over the coming months. That's going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and until the next one, guys, RogueGold. Ow.